us a wonderful talk on accessibility. This thing that I'm holding in my hand is a catch box. It's actually a microphone, so if you have any audience questions, just raise your hand. This will be thrown at you. If somebody behind you raises your hand, be aware or duck. That's the best advice I can give to you. And with that, I will give you the catch box and turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'm Karl Groves, and this talk is extreme accessibility. I'm not going to go through intros and all that sort of stuff. I work for the Paciello Group, and the slides are here at this really long URL, extreme-accessibility.karlgroves-sandbox.com. So how much does it cost to fix a bug? Does anybody know? Literally, do you even know this? Does anybody know this? That's a problem, isn't it? So here's a discussion of that from, this is from superwebdeveloper.com. This was interesting though because they say at first the cost of fixing a bug at the requirement stage is nominal when everything is on the drawing board. But as the software moves along in its life cycle, the cost of fixing a bug increases radically. We start at one times when we're at the initial development stage, when a bug is no more than a change in notion, but at the design stage, the relative cost is 5 times, so on and so forth. And then they talk about it going up to 150 times what it is originally. I did a lot of research into what this is, like what it costs to fix a bug and the relationship between the different phases. And what I found was there's a lot of information out there that people have, but unfortunately not a lot of it about the web and what it takes to fix a web bug. Here's another one that I thought was really important. This is from testobsessed.com. I forget the girl's name that writes that blog, but she's really big in QA stuff. And this was a really great discussion about bug fixing, which was, however, it was the hidden cost that drained us of life. Hours lost arguing about bugs in bug triage meetings, hours lost stumbling over the same known issues again and again, hours lost fighting with fragile and error-prone code bases to make even small change. It was demoralizing and immensely expensive. Anybody ever have to fix a website for accessibility before? Does demoralizing and immensely expensive ring any? Yeah, exactly. Wow. So I tried to figure this out, like what it costs to fix a bug just on my own. And I'm as you'll see here, I'm a pretty extreme optimist. Okay. What I did was I took the average fully loaded personnel cost for a QA developer and the fully loaded cost for a programmer and figure out what that would cost for them to do this work. So this is the time and cost estimates, and I build this lawyer time or lawyer style in 15-minute increments. So it may not take actually 15 minutes, but think about this. QA tester finds and opens a bug during the test process. So not only do they have to find the bug, but they have to log the issue. They have to make sure that they can replicate it, blah, blah, blah. I put that in as an hour. The QA or dev manager is going to assign the bug to whoever the developer is to fix it. Developer reviews the bug. Developer verifies that bug actually exists. The developer fixes it, assigns back to QA. QA tests, retests it, confirms the bug is fixed, the issue's closed. That's $265. And I think we'll see here some disparities in terms of what we think that the time is going to be for some of these things. And we know for a fact that a lot of bugs take a lot longer to fix, right? I'm debugging something in one of my products that I've spent hours trying to figure out what the hell is the problem. So we know that, I think as a matter of fact, I've gotten about 8 to 10 hours into just figuring out what the hell is happening, let alone figure out how to fix it. So we know this is optimistic, but if we think about this in an absolutely super optimistic thing, let's say, I don't know, a broken link or an image without alt text, it's $265. $265 each. I try to avoid making any of my talks marketing pitches, so I'm not going to discuss the name of this product, but my product is an accessibility testing product, and I find on average 40 to 70 issues per page. 40 to 70 issues per page. What's that times 265? That's a serious problem. And the problem when it comes to accessibility is that we have this mindset, this old and busted approach that I call it, which is somewhere along the line somebody goes, hey, is this accessible? We should probably find out. Let's run it through some tool and find out if it's accessible. Post-deployment remediation of accessibility bugs is by far the most expensive, we already talked about that, and the least likely to actually result in any net positive for the end user. And I know that people still do this a lot, even on my product, which is aimed at early stage development because people are still using it to test full URLs. Anybody recognize that hairy dude in the back there? Billy Gregory. Billy Gregory's my other half in the Viking and Lumberjack series. And I stole this slide from him. Because he does this great, in one of his talks, he does this great talk about making chocolate chip cookies. And so we have the idea that, what if we're making chocolate chip cookies, right, when do you put the chips in? Before you bake it, right? Because otherwise you're going to end up with this. We're just going to slap on the chips, and after the fact, after you pull them out, oh shit, we forgot the chips. We're going to just put them in there after we're done. And of course, that displeases the cookie. The only thing I have to say in dispute of Billy's story that he tells is, my youngest daughter would love that. She would just, she's A-okay with the chips after the fact. But the real solution to this is that we need to treat accessibility like all other development practices. This is a UX problem here. So I want to talk about extreme programming, because this talk is really about putting extreme programming practices in with accessibility. So the core goal of XP is to introduce a number of basic values, principles, and practices to improve quality. So the extreme part is the way in which they took the development best practices to the extreme. And a lot of the extreme programming stuff was created by guys like Ron Jeffries and Kent Beck, and they were part of this program to revamp HR software at Chrysler Corporation. What's really interesting is actually the project was a complete disaster. And it was a complete disaster for a lot of reasons that projects become complete disasters, is poor requirements management, bureaucracy, and stuff like that. But it was through that project that a lot of the extreme programming stuff came about that we know about now. So one of the things about that we thought was is a good extreme programming practice is code review. So if we're going to do code review, why not do pair programming? Pair programming, of course, is code review in real time, okay? And so why not do that? Or acceptance testing. We know that it's a good idea, I hope, to do acceptance testing, so why don't we automate that? And short release cycles, hell, why not continuous integration? And so we think about these principles of programming that we're going to take to the extreme. And so there are 4 basic activities of extreme programming. This is usually the part where I lose the UX designers. So I put my apology up there even before I say anything. Because the only true important product of system development is code. Code is what gets created. It's code that makes the product. The only important part of system development is the code. Okay? The next part is testing. If a little testing can eliminate a few flaws, a lot of testing can eliminate many more flaws. And this is where automated testing comes in, automated linting, automated test and build, all that sort of stuff comes into play, because we want to be able to do one thing throughout this entire process, and that is shorten the feedback cycle. Okay, if I go back to this previous slide, all of these things are aimed at one thing, and that is shortening the feedback cycle. The feedback cycle being the time in which we write code to the time in which we find out that our code is broken. Okay, so anybody here, what IDEs you guys use? Sublime, WebStorm, IDEA, any of that sort of stuff? So I use, I sort of vacillate between some of the ones that I'm using Atom mostly now and also IDEA. But all of them give me what? Red squigglies whenever I try to use an undefined property, right? Or I try to use a function that's not defined or something like that. Why is that important? Because it gives us real-time feedback. Okay, it's shortening the feedback cycle for us to know that we screwed something up. Because otherwise, if you're, let's say you're a C programmer, you're going to have to wait until you compile it to figure out that it's buggered up, right? Holy crap, we're going to compile the whole thing and then find it's broken? No, we want the IDE to tell us that. And it's all about the shortened feedback cycle of this process. So pair programming is real-time feedback. Acceptance testing, automated acceptance testing is going to be the kind of thing that we can do, again, before we even deploy it, we're going to test it. It's all about shortening the feedback cycle. The next thing is listening. Developers need to listen to what the customers need the system to do. The number one way to figure out that you've created a bad product is to have a product that's developed without having somebody tell you what they want in it, okay? So for instance, if in a formal Scrum type scenario, you have somebody who's the product owner, and the product owner should be listening to the feedback from their customers, incorporating that into what they want to do, and inserting into the backlog. The backlog should be driven by what the customer is saying that they want or what they think is going to need to be improved. So we need to listen throughout the entire process. And here's my apology to the UX people, and that's design. So good design is critical, especially as the product grows. Okay, unwieldy design is going to exacerbate quality, UX, and usability shortcomings. As a matter of fact, Bill and I did an audit on a system that was from an organization that was getting sued from the NFB for accessibility problems. And what we found out was, yeah, it had a lot of accessibility problems, but all of those accessibility problems were greatly exacerbated by the really terrible UX in the system. So why can't we apply any of these things to accessibility? Like, why are we still testing accessibility after the fact? Why are we still running our website and our web pages through tools like anything? I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to badmouth anybody, but anything that tests a URL only, right? Because when we test something by its URL, what are we testing? We're testing something that has already gone under a lot of design and development processes enough that we now have something we can test at a URL. So even if we're testing a QA environment, we're testing something where boatloads of UX and design and development decisions have already been made. We've already decided what our back-end and front-end frameworks are going to be. We've already decided our color palette. We've already decided all sorts of stuff around widgets and libraries and stuff like that. By the time it's at a URL that we can test, we're already too far down the development cycle. So let's apply some XP to accessibility. First off, we want to define requirements from the perspective of the user. And I'm a huge proponent of Gherkin. Have any of you guys ever used Gherkin? Gherkin syntax, Cucumber.js. So what's great about Gherkin is Gherkin is what they call a domain-specific language. Now, in the Cucumber.js acceptance test library, what you do is you define these steps in the Gherkin syntax, and then Cucumber can parse that and turn it into acceptance tests. Well, I find that this is really powerful even if you don't use Cucumber.js. You can use this, first off, you can use Codecept.js, which now interprets this stuff. But what I find is, one of the things to know about UX is if you can't describe it, then you shouldn't be developing it. So that's step number one. If you can't describe it, the user's not going to be able to use it. So what the Gherkin syntax does is, I've sort of mishmashed this into my own a feature description and a user story. So my user story is, as a registered member of the site, I want to enter my credentials and be logged in so that I can begin using my special member features, okay? And then what we're going to be developing here is a modal dialog. And our modal dialog needs to be, the interaction needs to be defined in terms of steps that can be verified And these steps can be verified either by the programming language or the test library, which is Cucumber in certain cases. But these are all manual test steps as well. So our first scenario, I'm on the home page and I want to launch the login dialog. And so we have these basically 4 important keywords: given, when, then, and then some steps like I see, I hear, whatever. So given that I'm on the home page, I see a login button. So that's our first thing that we need to test for. Does the login button exist? Next, when I gain focus on the login button, I see a visible state change. So now we have a step that we can test for again. Gaining focus on the login button, visual state change. When I activate the login button, I see the modal dialog appear. I see that there's a close button. So each of these things here are also testable items. And so we've defined these requirements from the perspective of the user, and we've also defined testable criteria that we can test for in the acceptance test and maybe even the automated test scenarios as well. Now, we also want to write accessibility-specific unit tests, okay? So here's some accessibility-specific unit tests that I wrote for this A11Y dialog. It's a jQuery UI dialog that I've extended to make sure it's accessible. But so here's some accessibility-specific unit tests. Nothing in the dialog should have ARIA hidden. Actionable elements outside the dialog should have ARIA hidden. And so these are accessibility-specific unit tests for this feature. And so these are really important to include in our regular unit tests. Okay, again, keep in mind these are our regular unit tests, not extra special stuff that we have to do for accessibility only. We just need to keep that stuff in mind. So that would be like things like focus management, right? So if going on further down the page here, what's going to happen is that invisible stuff should not be affected. Dialog must have an alert dialog role. And I think maybe it's not this one, but there should be another one somewhere where I have that the active element in the page is going to be the dialog when it's open and when it's first opened and stuff like that. So those are accessibility-specific unit tests. Now we need to write accessibility-specific acceptance tests. Okay? So again, using the gherkin syntax, in this case, if we're not using the gherkin syntax, we can still write acceptance tests based on the use case. So if we're writing a use case, a specific use case test for manual testing, then we need to make sure that it discusses steps like gain focus, so on and so forth. Locate the button, sign up, activate the button, sign up. And when I write use cases like this, I separate out these steps. You know, because you could just say activate the sign up button, but the problem is what we want to do is first find the sign up button, because keyboard focus, gaining access to it is an important step as part of this process. But it's still part of just the regular old acceptance test. Now, I'm a strong believer in pair programming. A lot of people tend to freak out when they hear talk about pair programming. PMs and executives especially, because they're going to be like, I can't have 2 people doing the exact same thing. This person could actually be used doing other stuff. This is 2 billable resources that I have doing the same thing. Actually, what happens is that pair programming increases the software quality without impacting time to deliver. And that is a quote from the guys that I was mentioning earlier, Cunningham and Ron Jeffries and stuff like that. And what they found was that because of that short feedback, that immediate feedback cycle of pair programming, you actually don't impact time, because over time, what ends up happening is the benefit outweighs the cost, and the fact that the feedback cycle is even shorter, right? So we don't have to do rework on bugs and all that sort of stuff. If we look at the overall product life cycle, pair programming, from what they say at least, and I tend to believe them, is going to not impact the project deliverable time. Next up, iterate on small pieces of work often. And when I say small, I mean really, really, really small. I'm guilty of violating this numerous times myself. But basically, we're going to take a small, defined piece of success criteria like, I don't know, make sure I have provided focus to the login button. Focus on just that one thing. Write your tests on just that one thing. Commit that one thing and move on. And the shorter pieces of work, what ends up happening again, shortens the feedback cycle, okay? It's getting real-time valuable feedback in time to have impact on the system's development. When bugs are found, tests are written. This is extremely important. It's a huge deal among my guys when I talk to them and we have a bug reported, is we need to replicate that bug by writing a test case that replicates the failure and then fixing that. So a great example is on June 1st, I pushed up a bunch of new tests for my product, and what I found out was that I had forgotten. One of the things we test for is whether frames have titles on them, and so unfortunately, the number one source of frames these days are actually ad networks. Okay, so if you go to most sites and you experience a frame, it's usually an iframe that comes from Google Ads or whatever. Google Ads actually has done a good thing recently. They added ARIA hidden to their frames, which is great because they can't tell you what an appropriate title is for the ad because the ad just comes from whatever the Google AdWords people have created. So they can't create a good title for it. Actually, I think they could. They could use the text from the ad. But anyway, they added ARIA hidden so at least people with assistive technologies can ignore it. Unfortunately, my test didn't take into consideration ARIA hidden. So now I have something I need to figure out. I need to figure out how to ignore ARIA hidden. So I write a test case for that. And I say, it should ignore anything with ARIA hidden. I write it, I modify my code, I make sure that test passed, and then I'm done, okay? Continuous integration is really great, especially for accessibility, because as I mentioned before, my product finds 40 to 70 errors per page, right? And some of those are going to be the kind of things that can't be fixed really quickly. Color contrast is a great example. We're not going to fix our color contrast very easily, because it's probably tied to our branding. So if it's tied to our branding, that's going to be something that has to get pushed down the backlog quite a bit. But if it's stuff like alt text or form labels or something like that, we can fix that. So we should fix that, and when we do fix it, it should get pushed into production. And that's what continuous integration is all about, is we create a build of new fixes, push them live if they pass their tests, and bang. And now we've incrementally improved accessibility for all those people who were impacted by those alt text, missing alt text and missing field labels. Collective ownership. So I love this quote. It's whether you realize it or not, your design is already distributed amongst your team. And a lot of times Billy and I go around and we'll do training and stuff like that, and we'll see that what we've seen in almost every case is everybody's sort of siloed, right? And so when the very beginning of the first day of the training event, we usually do a high-level sort of overview of accessibility. And what we'll notice is like, this is the table of UX people, and then that's the table of PMs, and then that's the table of QA people, and this is the front-end developers. And everybody just sort of sits by themselves. And so one of the first things Billy and I do is tell everybody, get up and go find somebody that they don't know and sit next to them. Everybody needs to understand that whether you realize or not, your design is distributed among your team. Because especially if there's a case where something that needs a design and isn't, say, in the wireframe documents or isn't already defined somewhere else, front-end developers are just going to make it up. They're going to do what they think is appropriate based on their own knowledge and skill set. But I think that the other part of this that's really important is that everybody also should feel part owner of the end product. Everybody should feel that they have a right and a duty to contribute to the quality of the end product, right? That, oh, design's not my job. That's cool. Design's not your job. Go ask the designer, or go tell the designer you have a better idea, or tell the designer that you think, hey, you know what, we're not going to get our color contrast right if we use these colors. But the not my job thing has to stop in order to benefit accessibility. Integrate testing tools in all aspects of development. We know that automated testing, whether it's accessibility testing or security or whatever, we know automated testing isn't going to do everything. In accessibility, automated testing can only catch about 30% of the accessibility best practices that are out there. But to the extent that we can find things, we should. And it should be in the hands of everybody, all the way from design to production to content creation. Everybody should have access to accessibility testing. We also need unified criteria and tooling for accessibility at the organization. The organization needs to use a single tool to do the testing. We can't have somebody, go, this guy uses Wave, like the QA developer uses Wave, and the developer does something else, because the problem at that point is, irrespective of the quality of either of those tools, let's say assume that they're both the same, what's going to happen is we have this tool says this thing this way, this tool says this thing this way, and we get fights. But the best way to do this is to have everybody use the same thing, so that we at least have the same identical criteria being measured across the entire thing, and the same exact information as well. Okay. So with this, I'm going to say you don't have accessibility problems. You have quality problems. Okay. I recently got into a little tiff on Twitter about this same sort of thing, and I have this belief that accessibility is a quality issue. Find me, tweet to me if you can find an accessibility best practice that is not related to the quality of your deliverable. Okay, it's a quality problem. A lack of quality-oriented practices elsewhere is your first warning sign that you will fail miserably in accessibility. Believe that. If you're not already doing unit testing, you're already a firm believer in accepting technical debt, and you're never going to get accessibility right if you're not getting regular code quality right. And then finally, this is my last slide. Your challenge, if you accept it, get yourself out of the accessibility silo. Okay? Nobody ever solved accessibility by being the only person who ever talked about it. Stop treating accessibility as a separate concern and start approaching accessibility as a quality domain. And that's it. That's me. I'm Karl Groves, and that's my contact information. Any questions? Or anyone just want to get this box thrown at them? I don't know if I can reliably throw that far. I really sucked at football, and this thing is square, so. See? She almost got it.
I don't know if this thing's actually picking up. But I was just curious, when you talk about, especially like at the beginning of the talk, when you're talking about the instant feedback and stuff like that, obviously there are very few things you could test for, but have you guys thought about trying to write any kind of like extensions for Atom or Dreamweaver or any of the other IDEs that would try and test for accessibility things like in your CSS or
Yeah.
HTML or JavaScript or anything like that that may be able to, at least at the very least catch things like color contrast errors where you're defining a background color and a text color and they're,
Yeah.
1-to-1 contrast ratio or something like that.
So we worked with Microsoft right after we went live, and we worked with them on a Visual Studio plugin. So we have a Visual Studio plugin. I have most of a Sublime Text plugin that's just sort of been sitting dormant. So if anybody wants to take that over, it's almost done if you know Python. But you're exactly right, like having that real-time feedback. It would be great to have something like that in Atom, Sublime Text, IDEA, IntelliJ, WebStorm. Any Java people want to take that on, I'd be glad to have that done. Right now, there are plenty of accessibility testing integrations with Grunt and Gulp that you could go for, so that's sort of like second best. Any other questions? No? It means I either confused the crap out of you or you thought it was awesome.
Almost fell over the table. So in your experience when you work with companies and you go and do those trainings, how long does it seem to take for them to get it right? To take whatever their practice is that day and enhance it in this extreme way and shift those gears?
I'd like to say that we've found a reliable way to estimate that. The reality is it comes down to culture, and it comes down to someone in the room like having their aha moment and deciding to take that on. So I did training I did developer training and QA training for a company that makes time tracking software, and the driver for that was a UX person, so there was already somebody internally that was driving it anyway, and then there were two developers. They had two really good developers who were also into these guys always wanted to play with the latest and greatest. So one minute they're on React and then next minute they're on Angular. And they happened to internalize, oh, this is cool. This can differentiate my code. So that was great. Others, not so much. Others just don't seem to get it. And that's the problem is they need to have an aha moment and they need to have somebody internalize it and put that into practice. We do have some who are integrating stuff into their build cycles and all that sort of stuff. But not enough, really, yet. And I think that that's a problem. But I think the bigger problem for them is that they have to get their house in order with QA first, and get I have some who are customers of my product who I'm actually having to help them get their CI process in order before they can actually use the product effectively, because they're like, CI, what's that? That sounds really cool. So we got to fix that first. So I wish I had a great answer for that, but I don't. Anyone else? Thank you all. Oh, come on, man. You could.
So this tools not all that automated stuff. When you're trying to get a development team that has differing degrees of experience with accessibility, what do you recommend that they do as far as the manual testing their code before they commit it to the repository?
The easiest thing anybody could ever do for testing for accessibility is use their own stuff. Turn off the trackpad, put away the mouse, use their own stuff with keyboard. You'd be surprised at how much stuff you find just immediately. So that's the one thing I would say. As a matter of fact, in terms of creating that aha moment for anybody, just do that. Or, we've done this before, Billy and I have, which is just turn on VoiceOver. Especially if everybody in the room has Macs, turn on VoiceOver, use your stuff. And what they'll find out is they're like, man, first off, this VoiceOver thing's really annoying. But there's all these things that I didn't fix, you know what I mean? There's all these things I don't know. And Bill has a great practice of when we first get a site to audit, one of the first things he'll do just as a sniff test to figure out how bad things are, load up a page, hit tab a bunch of times, and then look at the screen and figure out where he is. And if you don't know where you are, then you've already missed up visible focus indication and all that sort of stuff. So get them used to doing things like that. It's anybody here Monty Python fans? So The Meaning of Life with the scene with Mr. Creosote, and there's he comes up to this thing. I'll have the whole lot, right? That's what accessibility can seem like. One of the things that I stress about is when I add new tests to my product, that means more issues are going to get found, and developers are going to be like, holy shit, this is really bad. I have sites now that are getting 1,300 errors per page, and that's like the wafer. You know what I mean? That's like the little wafer before Mr. Creosote blows up. So if we can start small and just get them doing stuff like that, just turn on VoiceOver and tab around or stuff like that. That's probably the easiest thing, and hopefully that gets them also thinking about accessibility without thinking about eating the whole menu. Anyone else? No one? No one who wanted to wait longer than this guy did? See, you look at it.
That was the sort of catch. So I don't really have a question. I just have a comment. We recently redesigned our website. We did the big, background videos like everyone's doing, the big silent background videos. And something one of my coworkers thought of, and he's not even, like we kind of all share QA, I guess, but he's like, well, what about China, who blocks YouTube, or using YouTube for the background? Like, what if someone's visiting our website from China? And we're, a university, so people are going to be visiting our website.
Yeah.
So we had to find a solution where if the video doesn't load for some reason, they're not seeing a black, your country does not allow this screen. So we had to get a proxy server in China, and there's services out there you can buy to do this, and load the video from that proxy server to see what's happening there. And then and I'm glad we did that because just a few months later we realized we're going to be live streaming commencement using YouTube, which we've done before, but now we have a solution for people who are blocked with, have YouTube blocked in their country.
Uh-huh.
So it's kind of like I don't know, just a comment. I thought
Okay.
it was a cool thing we found, and maybe you guys might benefit from that.
Cool.
I'm not a sports guy, so.
Neither am I. I'm going to kind of piggyback on that. We're actually in the process of redesigning our homepage, and we came up with 4 different designs and did a survey for people to gather opinion, to see what people like, what they didn't. And one of the things that people were looking at was a video, much like what you described. But in my research, I had read that having a video that plays automatically, even though it's silent, is still bad for accessibility. But there are plenty of people doing it out there. So I'm glad you brought that up. So I'm curious, what's your take on that? Is my information bad, or is that?
No, it's definitely bad. Yeah, it's a problem because, at least as far as I understand, auto-playing video is going to convert really well. So now we have a legitimate fight between accessibility and business because they want that, because that content converts. So what I like though is what Facebook is doing now. When first off, I don't know if they require it or not, but I've been seeing a lot of videos on Facebook with captions, so that's awesome. And then the next thing is it loads up without sound. Okay, because one of the problems that you'll end up having on a site that is playing video, I could demo it if we have time, but I'm sure you can imagine this, that you're on a screen reader. Your only access to the information on the screen is through your speakers. So then you load up this page, and the freaking thing is playing audio, and you don't know where the controls are to turn it off, right? You have no idea where this video is on the screen, because all of us, we can form a cognitive model of the spatial positioning of everything on the screen, and we can assume, based on the fact that there's a video player, that there's going to be controls at the bottom. Like we have that knowledge, that experiential knowledge of videos to know all this sort of stuff. So you're on a screen reader. Your only access to the screen is through the speakers. The speakers are also blurting out all this information from the video. What do? You bounce, right? So you're gone. So what I like is instead is autoplay the video, have the captions turned on, have the user have the ability to turn that volume on and off, and I think that's a good happy medium. Oh, sorry, had a follow-up.
Yeah. Let me rephrase the question. Auto playing, even without audio, I read was still poor for accessibility. Is that true, or was my information bad?
I don't know. I don't know if we can say that. I don't know if we can say that definitively. It's not gonna cause harm if it's silent. That's for sure, right? Because it's not gonna interrupt the speech buffer. It's not gonna do anything. You know what I mean? Is it ideal? Probably not, right? Because because the user's not gonna have that content. When they arrive at the video, they're gonna be in the middle of it. You know what I mean? So the video's gonna be playing. It's gonna be in the middle of it. They're not gonna know what the hell it was. So it's not ideal, but is it a trade-off we can accept? That's going to be a discussion for the organization.
Well, I was just going to kind of add to that. At first I was going to clarify that he was talking about silent video. But I guess the concern at that point would be the same concern that you have with animations and things like that. It's a matter of
Yeah.
things like that. If you've got auto playing information, you know, automatically moving information, then you can potentially trigger, you know, any of those kinds of issues.
It's a content issue though, right? I mean, that's going to exist
That's
whether.
absolutely a content issue.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to that quality problem
Right.
of accessibility.
Yeah, yeah. Was there somebody else with a question, comment? Yeah.
People online, or if people are watching this, they're gonna be like, what is all that? So, I was just gonna piggyback off of that a little bit, because all the videos in the background we have going, it's not, content that the user absolutely needs to see, it's just pretty designy kind of stuff. you
Yeah.
know, It's just aesthetically pleasing, it's not providing information. And then, they are silent, and then we have, when the user, in our CMS adds a silent background video, they're required to put, we're calling it an alt attribute, but it's just an ARIA label
Right.
on the iframe that says, or on the div that contains the iframe that says what's in it. So it would say students with professor learning, or, you know, whatever the video is
Yeah.
portraying.
You want to take that ARIA label off the div. It's not a labelable element.
Maybe it is, it's been a while.
Put it on something else that's labelable there, or put it in hidden content.
It might be on the iframe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to mention that.
Thanks. I'll write that.
All right. Anyone else? Really sitting on that question. All right. Thank you.